Hello, I'm Harry Riley. Welcome to Harry's Tales. I enjoyed writing them and hope you enjoy them too. This story is called The Magical £5 Note, a mystery story by Harry Riley. The characters in this story are fictional, and resemblance to any person, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. 1960 was a bad year for Police Inspector Andy Walker of Merrybrook Division. The year started with so much promise. First there was his promotion from sergeant, after 10 years in the force. He was a steady copper and was on first-name terms with Superintendent John Smethurst. But then came the Chase murder, and it all went belly up. On patrol in the Victoria Chase district, early one morning, he had spotted Warren Lambert, a well-known burglar, just emerging from a dark alleyway. He had signalled for Sergeant Mike Henshaw, his driver, to pull over so they could have a word with the little wretch. But on hearing the car screeching up, Warren bolted back up the alley. Andy jumped out, ordering him to stop, as Mike drove round the corner to cut off escape at the other end of the passageway. At a bend in the alley, Andy lost sight of his quarry and emerged in the next street empty-handed, just as Mike pulled up alongside, leaning across and winding down the passenger window. Where did the little blighter go? Andy knew Lambert must have ducked through a gap in the iron railings that bordered the old Victorian cemetery and hidden behind one of the big Gothic tombstones. He'd be long gone now. No matter, they'd have him tomorrow, at his digs on the green. 2 hours later a call came through of a suspicious death, only 2 blocks from where they'd seen Warren Lambert. When Andy and Mike arrived, there was already a uniformed policeman at the scene. It was the home of a wealthy businessman. They rushed up the stairs indicated by the constable and carefully entered the bedroom. And there, sprawled on the bed, was a heavily blood-stained body of a male in his early 40s. Andy recognised him as Brian Fellows, the owner of the property. He was quite dead. Mike sighed. Why did he have to live in a poxy area like this with all his brass? Andy peered closer at the corpse. I don't know, Mike, but he's paid a heavy price. Been bludgeoned on the head with something heavy. And I bet I know where we'll find the murder weapon. A burglar's jemmy. I'll warrant. The constable said a window on the ground floor had been forced, and the murderer had probably left the same way, as there was blood on the windowsill. Both Andy and Mike spent the next 30 minutes going separately through all the rooms in the house, hunting for clues, before departing and leaving the constable on duty outside, waiting for forensics to turn up. Andy was correct. As dawn broke, they found a bloodstained jemmy hidden behind a broken headstone in the cemetery. They put it into a plastic bag so as not to disturb fingerprints. Forensics confirmed that the wall safe under the carpet in the parlour had been opened and was empty. The owner's wife turned up at the police station in a drunken state and said she'd been out all night at the casino. A taxi had taken her home to find her husband dead and £10,000 stolen from his safe. Warren Lambert was easy to find and even easier to break down under questioning. He'd put his hand up to the murder, but said the victim had refused to hand over his money and Warren had struck him with the jemmy in a fit of temper. A fortnight later the superintendent called Andy into his office and stiffly suspended him. He was being investigated for theft, relating to the murder at Victoria Chase. Andy's bank account had been swelled by £10,000, and he'd no answer. Several months later, just before Christmas, the super rang, saying the CPS were charging him with theft. Andy's wife Megan walked out after a round and took their pet dog, and then a letter came stating his house was being repossessed through non-payment of arrears. This happened because his bank account was frozen. He had spent a miserable Christmas trying to work out where it had all gone wrong. Even Mike Henshaw, his best pal, kept away. Andy Walker was a pariah. He'd been advised to get himself a good lawyer. The evidence was pretty damning. He'd been alone in Brian Fellow's parlour and could easily have found the safe and stolen the money. He had unaccountably become £10,000 richer, and this would send him to prison. Now he walked along the country lane and stopped to look over the field gate at the bleak wintry scene. It was the first day of the new year. All he'd ever valued was gone. A figure stirred on the other side of the edge, and an old tramp appeared, wearing a torn army coat and covered in leaves, apparently from sleeping in the edge bottom. He stared at Andy with wet, rheumy eyes and approached the gate, dragging his feet. "Would you have a cigarette for an old army veteran, mister?" Andy shook his head. He didn't smoke. "Oh, well, no matter." The tramp coughed and continued in a wheezy voice. "I don't suppose you could let me have the cost of a breakfast to set me up for the day?" Andy was touched. He still had food at home, but all he had in his pocket was a £5 note. He dug deep and gave the man his very last fiver. This man had nothing. At least if they sent Andy to prison, he would have a roof over his head. Oh, thank you. God bless you, mister. You don't know what you did today. You've saved my life. The old soldier gratefully took the money, saluted awkwardly, and shuffled away. Andy smiled. He felt better already. The next day he heard Warren Lambert had revoked his confession to murder, claiming it was made under duress, and he also denied the gem he was his, saying it had been planted. Now the police were digging into Andy's past, and somebody found a photo of him drinking with a dead man at a party. Andy Walker was accused of committing the murder before his shift began, just after Mrs. Fellows had left the house in a taxi for the gambling club, and of laying the blame at the feet of Warren Lambert, a man of slow intellect. Mike Henshaw was quizzed and admitted Andy had not been his usual self for several weeks before the murder, and had been quite crabby of late. The trial was conclusive. The prosecutor had a field day. Andy was tied up in knots in the witness box and quickly lost his temper. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. The judge, wearing his black cap, described him as the lowest of the low, a bent policeman. A lot of people would be dancing on his grave. The prison chaplain was a friendly man. He asked the prisoner to confess his sins. There was something about this man's voice and his watery eyes that troubled Andy. He was sure he'd met him before, but where? The prison governor told Andy not to bank on an appeal, as they really succeeded. The Home Secretary had to have new, solid evidence. A lot, though, was going on behind the scenes. Superintendent John Smethurst received a tip-off from an anonymous caller and ordered a watch put on Charlotte Fellows. It paid off. She was seen leaving the casino one night in the company of Sergeant Mike Henshaw, and the pair's movements were closely monitored. They must have known they'd been seen, for they were picked up at Dover, trying to flee to the continent. Charlotte Fellows claimed it had all been Mike's idea. He was jealous of Andy Walker's promotion, and believed it should have been his. The pair might have got clean away had it not been for the anonymous caller, and the fact that an old tramp had caused a big ruckus at the docks, attracting the police, as he begged Mike Henshaw for money. "Only a fiver, mister," he said. "Just a fiver for an old war veteran. Could you please?" End.